Helena,
Sí? Yes?
Enrique from Portugal,
Oh,
Aveiro.
hi Enrique,
Are
how
you
are you?
listening? Hello, Helena. I have a very brief question to Ben. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, so these trends that you have found over time have decreased health of the ocean by applying the index that you have developed. Have you seen any impact of the conservation measures that are being applied a little bit all over the world? Because there's this, at least in some parts of the world, with the very intense debate about the creation of more protected areas, expanding those areas. Has this had a measurable impact on the index?
Yeah.
Could you understand the question?
Yes, I could, yeah. It's a great question. It's actually, like I said in the talk, it's one of the main motivations for developing the index. And until we got a couple years into it, it was too soon we just didn't have enough points in time to start to answer that question. And the short answer is yes, we're beginning to see some benefit from that. The longer answer is that it really depends on how we're using the information about marine protected areas in the index. So you saw me briefly mention that the sense of place goal, this like the cultural identity we have with the oceans, part of the way we measure that is how much of the oceans are protected within marine protected areas. And so by definition, increasing MPA extent has improved the score for the Ocean Health Index on that particular goal. We know that in the end, that's really sort of a cultural way of thinking about it. Like people knowing that more of the ocean is under marine protected areas makes them feel better about the state of the ocean. And so they maybe believe that things are better. Of course, a lot of people are hoping that marine protected areas actually improve the abundance and the condition of the species within those areas. And that, I think, in most cases, it's just too soon to say, and we don't have enough data for most of the marine protected areas to say at a global scale. So one of the ways that we've built the framework of the Ocean Health Index is that when you take an action, a regulation, or in this case, creating a marine protected area, you get credit for that because you've made an action towards improving the health of the ocean. But it takes time for the actual condition or the status of the ocean to improve. When that happens, and it might be 1 year or 5 years or 20 years, depending on the system, when that condition improves, you'll then get additional benefit in the score for that status improving, and you'll see the trend change and likely increase, which will give you even further a benefit. So the index is designed to essentially sequentially acknowledge the change in the system that's towards a healthier system. So we're seeing some immediate improvement from MPA creation because of the role it's playing as a governance action. It's too soon yet to know whether it's really improved the sort of the biodiversity within those marine protected areas. That's one example.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Enrique. Any other questions? Yes, Isai.
Hello. Could you go back to the map that you show us about the availability of aquaculture, that one where China was blue, but Chile also?
Yeah, go ask your question while I'm doing
it. Yeah, it was that one, yeah.
Oh.
That one. It also.
This one?
Yeah. It shocks me to see that, maybe it's because I'm too far away, but Spain doesn't have any kind of color, or that means that because we already achieve or everything that we can do, or?
It's because it's only you have a steeper continental shelf. So if we zoomed in, you'd see there's actually quite a lot of area there. It's just that the big areas that you can see are where it's a shallow continental shelf, and so you just see it more. This is always the challenge with global maps is in order to really see what's going on in coastal areas, you have to zoom in order to see it. But no, Spain has plenty of potential. Well, you're already using a lot of it, but there's even more potential.
Yes, Jatsi.
Thank you for the very exciting presentation. I have a question about this aquaculture. You mentioned that aquaculture has great potential to feed world population. And that seems precisely the way China is doing by expanding this aquaculture. But we also know a lot of environmental groups, kind of strongly against the aquaculture. So maybe, for instance, in the US, it seems you have very little aquaculture. So you see, in order to promote this aquaculture as a way to solve, to feed the world population, what would be the great challenging to achieve that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think historically in the 1980s and 90s, in the early growth phase of aquaculture, that was when we saw a lot of examples of pollution from salmon pens, creating anoxia underneath them and around them, and where shrimp farms were converting mangroves at a really fast rate. And a lot of the negative attitude towards aquaculture grew out of those early examples. Most of those practices have changed. So a lot of the resistance to aquaculture has come from people not being up to date in their information and understanding about aquaculture. So I think one challenge is to basically an education campaign or changing the misperceptions about aquaculture and sort of getting the right information. Not to say that it's without impact, but just that people understand what it is today compared to what it used to be. I think China, in many cases, has probably overdeveloped aquaculture to an unsustainable level, and they're learning those lessons and starting to change their practices to make it more sustainable. So as a further information for guiding what is possible, like China is basically helping give us a lot of best practices, lessons learned from what happens if you overdevelop aquaculture. So I think that's the second challenge, is really understanding better where these limits are and incentivizing the development of aquaculture to not create too dense of farms, but to maybe spread them out. There's economic cost to doing that, but this is sort of the challenge of figuring out that kind of cost benefit of how do we incentivize aquaculture growth but still make it sustainable for the environment. And then the third challenge is what you alluded to with the United States having almost no aquaculture, is a governance one. And the US rules and regulations have made it almost impossible to have aquaculture in the United States in the oceans. And there's a long story about why that is. But there are many countries that have very progressive rules and regulations around aquaculture growth, and many countries that have very prohibitive rules and regulations. And both have challenges. If it's too much pushing for aquaculture, you could get into a case where it's not sustainable. And if you have too prohibitive of rules and regulations, you don't allow it to ever develop. And so the challenge is finding the set of rules and regulations for each country that works for that country in terms of their own governance, but also is in that sweet spot of allowing aquaculture, but in a way that's sustainable. So there's a real governance challenge in coming up with the right incentives and rules and regulations to keep aquaculture growing in a sustainable way. So this is not to imply it's an easy path towards finding sustainable aquaculture in each country, by no means. But those are, I think, three of the big challenges to that.
Thank you. We have room for one more question, maybe, if you have one. Okay, and if not, I'm just gonna thank all of you for coming and being here and connected elsewhere, Portugal and Coruña. Thank you very much. And of course, I want to thank Ben Halpern a lot, and hope you come back soon.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.